It's called the Great American Race, and at the start of the racing season, NASCAR leads off with its Super Bowl, the Daytona 500. Originally a 200-mile race held on the beaches of Daytona, the first 500-mile race was in 1959. Since, Daytona has seen 58 years of racing. I'm Justin from NRN, and here is a list I'm sure you won't all agree with of the top 10 best Daytona 500s. Number 10, the 1967 Daytona 500. Mario Andretti had already made a name for himself in open-wheel racing. He won back-to-back IndyCar championships in 1965 and 66, but in 67, he had his sights set on winning the Daytona 500 in stock car racing's biggest event. Upon entering the race, he changed his hometown to Nazareth, Pennsylvania, due to the scrutiny foreign drivers were receiving at the time. Because, NASCAR. A lot of attention was on Andretti, though, to see how an open-wheel driver could handle the heavy and bulky stock cars. Andretti was a short little guy, and a special gas pedal had to be installed in the car just so his feet could reach the pedals. But once that famous lead foot could reach that pedal, he kept it there flat out, leading 112 of the 200 laps. Celebrating in Victory Lane, Andretti said, "You don't baby a car at Daytona like you do at Indy. You're flat out." That quote helps solidify NASCAR as a form of racing that should be taken seriously. Number 9, the 1997 Daytona 500. So there was no run to the finish and the race ended under caution, but the racing that led to that caution was pretty intense. The 25-year-old Jeff Gordon was raging a fierce 4-car battle for the lead with Bill Elliott, who was on a very long winless streak at the time, Dale Jarrett, and Dale Earnhardt, who was still trying to win his first Daytona 500. With 12 laps to go, Gordon shoved Earnhardt into the wall, causing him to crash into Dale Jarrett. Earnhardt's car is then slammed by swerving Ernie Irvan, and his number 3 Chevy is sent flipping. Jeff Gordon went on to win the race under caution to become the youngest Daytona 500 winner at the time. However, it was Earnhardt who stole the show when he famously insisted that his car be taken down from the tow truck just so he could drive his battered Chevy back to the pits and finish the race. That's the Intimidator for you. Number 8, the 2011 Daytona 500. Okay, so I've decided to include this one because this is just a great story and it's the kind of thing you daydream of doing. Young, and I mean young, Trevor Bayne had just turned 20 years old the day before the running of the 53rd Daytona 500. This 20-year-old, who wasn't even legal to drink, would be starting 32nd for the Wood Brothers in the Great American Race. On lap 197 of the 200, the 15th caution waved after Regan Smith spun sideways and collected Clint Boyer. At the 202 restart for the green-white checker finish, David Reagan was the leader, ahead of guess who? 20-year-old Trevor Bayne. On the restart, Reagan was black flagged for changing lanes before the start-finish line just before the 16th caution came out after a 3-car incident involving Earnhardt Jr., Ryan Newman, and Martin Truex Jr. During the caution, Reagan drove to pit road, giving the lead to Trevor Bayne. On the final lap of the second green-white checker finish, Carl Edwards mounted a charge on the inside lane. But the young Bayne moved down to block Edwards and maintained the lead to win his first NASCAR race and the Daytona 500 of all races at the age of 20, becoming the youngest driver to ever win Daytona to this day. Number 7, the 2002 Daytona 500. This one is a personal favorite of mine because it's just so damn funny and a tad wacky. Going into the 2002 season, the favorite to win the 500 was Tony Stewart. Well, his 500-mile race would become a 7-mile race when on lap number 3, his Joe Gibbs engine would go up in smoke. That's okay though, because the second favorite to win, Dale Earnhardt Jr., was still in the race. That was until he blew a tire and hit the wall on lap 23. Fast forwarding all the way to the end, with 5 laps to go, Jeff Gordon led Sterling Marlin. A crash happens from further back in the field, taking out 5 cars, including the defending Daytona 500 winner, Michael Waltrip, who nearly wrecked into the pace car that was driven by Jay Leno at the time. Up front, Marlin got a great restart and took the lead from Gordon, who ended up spinning himself out when he went to block. The caution flag waves with Marlin in the lead, his car smoking from damage that he sustained to the right front fender during that contact with Gordon. NASCAR decides to red flag the race so they can clean up the wreck, allowing for the race to end under green. Worried about the damage to his fender, Marlin takes it upon himself to get out of his car and tries to pull the fender away from the tire. But because NASCAR rules forbid working on the car under red flag except for non-points events, he was penalized before the restart and was sent to the rear of the field. Because of Marlin's goof, this would hand the lead over to none other than Ward Burton, who would go on to win the race. Burton's Daytona 500 win was the first for Dodge since Richard Petty's win in 1974. Number 6, the 1994 Daytona 500. Speaking of Sterling Marlin, even though he goofed in the 2002 race, the 94 Daytona 500 had different results. For 17 years, Marlin had raced for a second-rate team and had scored second-rate finishes. Well, finally, he was given the ride of his life from Morgan McClure Motorsport, and Marlin was ready to rain down a fury of burning rubber on the field. He would not be denied any longer. Marlin made his way through the field and got into a tight battle with swerving Ernie Irvan and crossed the line ahead of him to win his first NASCAR race by only a margin of 0.19 seconds. In Victory Lane, Marlin dedicated the win to his dad, Cuckoo Marlin, who raced for 12 years in NASCAR without ever scoring a race victory. Number 5, the 1989 Daytona 500. You would be surprised at how many of NASCAR's top drivers have never won the Great American Race. The list of names could actually make their own top 10. File that one away. Anyway, by 1989, Darrell Waltrip had tried 16 times to win Daytona, and had failed to do so 16 times. Now he tried for a 17th time in his number 17 Tide ride. But Waltrip, who was nicknamed Jaws because he ran his mouth faster than his motor, good lord, I see not much has changed, finally put his mouth where his gas tank is. Nursing a sputtering car that was about out of gas, he crossed the finish line to win his first Daytona 500, although many of the drivers questioned the win and the size of the gas tank in that car. But Waltrip couldn't hear the haters as he danced the icky shuffle in Victory Lane. Number 4, the 1998 Daytona 500. Dale Earnhardt was Mr. Daytona. He won Daytona 34 times in his legendary racing career. However, he had never won the Daytona 500. For 20 years, NASCAR's biggest win had eluded him. Well, in NASCAR's 50th year, Earnhardt finally scored his first and only Daytona 500 win. Whether you loved him or hated him, you had to admire and respect the performance one of the sport's greatest drivers put on to win its greatest race. The race ended when the caution came out on lap 198, with Earnhardt holding off Bobby Labonte and Jeremy Mayfield. Number 3, the 1976 Daytona 500. All race fans love a wild finish. Two drivers giving it everything they've got, racing the wheels off the car, bumping and banking as they scream towards the finish line. Well, no finish was wilder than the one in 1976 between the King Richard Petty and David Pearson. Richard Petty was in the lead when he crossed the line to begin his final lap of the race, but David Pearson was right behind him. When the two got to the backstretch, Pearson made his move and took the lead from Petty. Petty fought back in the final corner and ended up taking out both he and Pearson, spinning both of the cars down to the infield just short of the finish line. Petty's number 43 wouldn't start, but Pearson was able to keep his car running just long enough so that he could limp over the finish line for the win. To this day, many fans consider this finish to be the greatest in the history of NASCAR. Number 2, the 1959 Daytona 500. It was the very first running of the Daytona 500, and it's a finish that is still debated to this day. There were no cautions in the race, making it one of the few perfect races in NASCAR. During the final 30 laps of the race, Lee Petty battled with Beauchamp, the only two drivers to finish on the lead lap. Petty took the lead with 3 laps left, and was leading at the start of the final lap. Coming to the checkered flag, Petty and Beauchamp drove side by side right across the finish line for a photo finish. Beauchamp was declared the unofficial winner by NASCAR officials, and he drove to Victory Lane. Petty protested the result, saying that he had Beauchamp by a good 2 feet when he crossed the finish line. Beauchamp replied to that, saying he had no doubt that he had Petty by 2 feet. Fireball Roberts, who was standing at the finish line, said there's no doubt about it, Petty won the race. It took NASCAR founder Bill France Sr. 3 days to decide the winner of the race. In the end, with the help of photographers and footage, Lee Petty was officially declared the winner. The controversial finish actually helped propel NASCAR, though. The delayed results to determine the official winner kept NASCAR and the Daytona 500 on the front page of the newspapers for several days. Number 1, the 1979 Daytona 500. No race has ever been more important to NASCAR's success than the 1979 Daytona 500. It was to be the first 500-mile race to be broadcast in its entirety live on national television. Up until that point, races like the Indy 500 were shown on television as a tape delay and was usually in edited form. Most of the races aired starting with the final quarter to half of the race, but CBS signed a special contract with NASCAR to telecast the race in its entirety. Ken Squire and David Hobbs were to be the announcers in the booth, with Ned Jarrett and Brock Yates in the pits. With a snowstorm bogging down most of the country at the time, all eyes were on NASCAR for the very first time, and it didn't disappoint. On the final lap of the 500, race leaders Kel Yarborough and Donnie Allison wrecked one another on the backstretch. With Yarborough and Allison wrecked at the end, Richard Petty, who was half a lap behind, was able to cruise to victory and win his 6th Daytona 500. But the cameras weren't aimed at him. While Petty celebrated, an absolute brawl erupted between Yarborough, Donnie Allison, and his brother Bobby Allison at the site of the backstretch wreck. The fists went flying between the drivers, and it was all caught on camera and broadcast right into the homes all around the USA. Little did NASCAR know this was actually the best publicity they could ever have asked for. The finish had people talking. People who had never seen a NASCAR race in their life suddenly wanted to see more just because of the action that took place at the end of the race. This one race helped turn the average television viewer into race fans. And it's for this reason I believe the '79 Daytona 500 is the greatest 500. Do you agree with my list? Is there a Daytona 500 you think is better? Then leave it in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Justin with NRN. Thanks for watching.